Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Graham Knaus. I'm the Executive Director of CSAC and want to welcome you to our CSAC Institute. And we've been ever evolving in our 12-year history. And I want to thank you for your patience as we've transformed to a more virtual platform, given our world related to COVID-19. I also want to thank you for your engagement with us and your commitment to your own growth and success. It'll serve you and your career well, but as it does so, it will also serve the county and your community well. And so want to thank you for diving in. Typically introducing our Institute courses is our Dean, Bill Chiat, who, as many of you know, unexpectedly passed recently, and Bill was at the helm for the entire 12-year history of the Institute. And in fact, he was one of a very few brains that developed the original vision of the Institute, and he made it real. He made it real in terms of moving from one course to nearly 90, moving from one campus to 5, and now this virtual platform to increase our accessibility to folks who may be unable to travel. And Bill touched many, many folks in the course of his work, thousands of county leaders, including likely many of you. I had the good fortune of working with Bill from a number of different perspectives. I was faculty with him as the dean for the CSAC Institute. I've been a student, and now, or at least for the past few years, as a colleague, and he is greatly missed. I will say that we CSAC have sent out a memoriam honoring his legacy, and in addition to that, we just released a video that highlights some of the great value that he brought to many of us, both professionally and personally. And so I'd like to begin today's course with a moment of silence to honor Bill. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, today's course, Living and Leading in Chaotic Times, couldn't be more timely and more on point. There's been so much uncertainty and change that's occurred over the course of the last several months due to COVID-19, due to a changing fiscal reality, due to changes in the approach to work and how we engage with one another. And we're very fortunate to have one of our faculty members who's been with us for some time, Larry Liberty. He is an expert in this area in leadership from the whole person, from the whole organization, and has worked with Fortune 500 companies, local government, and nonprofits all across the country. So he's going to lead you through this today, which will be both personal and professional, to ensure that you're connected and can bring the highest value to your leadership skills. So with that, Larry, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Graham. All right, everybody, thanks very much for joining us today. And those of you who have not participated with us before, you'll see a place on the lower bar that says chat. And so along the way, if you have a question you want to ask or something you'd like to say, just feel free to tap there, and we will in fact be able to show you that, and we'll respond to your questions along the way. We're also going to have a PowerPoint presentation that I've created and been delivering for the last 6 months. And at the end of that, we'll have a more extensive Q&A as well. I'm going to now turn on my screen here, and with a little luck. All right, so thank you, everyone. The title of this particular webinar is called Living and Leading in Times of Chaos. And oddly enough, the origin of this particular content started back at the middle of January, when one of my clients sent me a note saying, presciently that he wanted to have a webinar for people around the country about how to live and lead in these chaotic times. And this was before I had heard the name COVID. So we started doing the research and putting together things that we thought would be useful. And so it's evolved from there. The purpose of today for us is to increase your awareness of how stress and chaos is impacting your performance. Obviously, everyone knows how it's impacting you experientially. We want to talk a bit more about how that's happening. And then the second purpose is to expand your ability to perform and to lead under stress, crises, and chaos. And so we have some tips and some tools and ideas about how to make that happen. The first thing I'd like to ask everybody on the call to do is to take a moment and sit back in your chair and just breathe for a moment. Take a couple of deep breaths, however you do that, in through your nose, out through your mouth, in any way that works for you. And I'll just be quiet for 30 seconds, and I'd like you to see if you can actually physically relax yourself just a bit more than you are by just doing some breathing. So do that right now. Very good. We're going to practice this a bit more, a couple more times during the webinar. I would like to invite you to maybe make a little sign for yourself. I've got a couple around my computer screens that say breathe, and it is a conscious reminder that that's one of the things we can control most quickly in terms of managing our stress. Well, obviously we're living in this disruptive times, and normal is not here anymore. You know, in some settings when I'm working with clients, I ask them how their worlds have been most disrupted. And it goes, of course, everything from not going to the workplace to, you know, having their kids at home. What we know now is that whatever we thought was normal, I think most of us have come to grips with the notion that normal as we knew it will be no more. I manage or notate my own experience of the COVID world by the way I relate to United Airlines, where I've been flying for most of my life. And I thought a few months ago, when I had to cancel some trips, I thought, well, it might be till the fall when I get on an airplane. And the other day, for the first time, when I saw them laying off tens of thousands of people, I wondered if there'll even be a United Airlines the next time I'm ready to fly. So normal as we know it is no more. I want to talk a bit about, some people know a lot about this, but I want to talk a bit about how we operate in stress. Most people now know we have this part of our brain called the limbic system. Limbic system is evolutionarily allowed us to prevail, and it's a part of our brain that's about fight, flight, or freeze. And most people have experienced this whenever you're driving along in California. If you've ever been pulled over by a CHP or by any flashing red light, we know the instinctive reaction in our body happens automatically. It's the place that stores emotions and long-term memories. It's a place where it's activated automatically and without any conscious intent. And of course, there's a chemical reaction that goes along with that. And what it does essentially is it hyper-focuses us on threats. And this is important as we go through the rest of this conversation, because this part of our brain, as you can well imagine, gets taxed, over time if you have a big stressor. Well, if you have lots of stressors, imagine the amount of hyper-focus that you're trying to handle all at the same time. So this part of our brain has been operating more than probably for most of us in our lives at any time, and more intensively for a longer time. So limbic system is the survival center. The other part that's most important here is called the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that's newest. It's pretty small actually, and it's the place that does the analysis and the organization and the planning for things. If you're trying to make plans for a vacation, or some of you may have thought, maybe I'll rent an RV and we'll drive to Oregon, or we'll drive to Minnesota. All that planning goes on in this part of the brain. And this is the part of the brain where we make decisions, and we configure information to predict the future. Obviously, this part is being taxed as well because of our inability to predict the future these days. It's the place that manages social interactions, as we know, and it's the place that expresses our personality. So if I ask you to answer the question, I'm the kind of person who, and you fill in that particular sentence in your head, that particular answer probably came from this particular part of your brain. So the key thing to know about those two things is there's this dance going on, and it's gone on for a long time, and that's the prefrontal cortex trying to do planning, and the limbic system, which is trying to make sure that we survive. And one of my clients said that that his disaster plan turned out to be a disaster because it was so far off from reality. So there's this tension that goes on between these parts of our brain that's always there, and it's evolved in the last 600,000 years since Homo sapiens arrived to really help us survive, but also to prosper. Well, what's happening is that chaos in and of itself is actually a threat to our survival. And some of the definitions that are most useful for chaos include the following words. And as I put these 5 words on here, I'd like you to look and see which of those, if one is prevalent, which of those is most disrupted now, or most impactful now to you in terms of the way that you're operating. And for some of you, it may be that, the chaos component of disorder is just, way higher than it used to be. Different people have different relationships to this word, but the word in and of itself really creates a kind of experience of threat to us. A lot of people say unpredictability because we value our capacity in the Western world to be able to plan and be able to anticipate the future. You turn on the TV tonight, and wherever you are in California, you'll see somebody predicting the weather, and they'll probably have a 5-day forecast. And there's something that gives us some kind of solace. There's something that gives us some kind of foundation of feeling good about ourselves because we can kind of feel and sense the future. When you turn this chaos machine on and all these things become unpredictable and disarray, life gets very complicated. So chaos leads to a kind of crises, and there are 2 places that crises exist these days. One is in the external world, where we have different kinds of crises that are emerging, that are taking time and attention and energy. And at the same time, we have crises that are going on inside of our minds and these different experiences that we're having. And the capacity of our brains and our bodies and our minds and our emotions to handle all this obviously is being taxed. And one of the reasons it's being taxed is because if we look in human history, we find that this is one of the few times that we've had so many crises simultaneously, world crises. Obviously, we have the COVID crisis that is a health crisis going on. We have the world economic crisis that is affecting people in every direction you can. We also now have a social justice crisis that's happening around us. And if you turn on TV every night, there's a competition for what stories are going to have attention there. But also important is that we have a social crisis, which I'll talk about momentarily. And that is leading for many of us to a place of having a mental health crisis. And so just think about for a moment how many of these particular world events are having a real effect on you and your family and your colleagues in your community right now. And depending on where you are and what your circumstances are, it could be all of them or it could be 2 or 3 of them. But mostly we know that the brain has not been organized and not had to be tested to have this amount of demand placed upon us as a human being for most of our lives. Social crisis is a function of the fact that we like being together. And I found this great quote which says humanity's superpower is being together. Mostly there's no problem we can't solve if we get together. And so the moment we isolate people and we put them in a situation where they cannot be together and they cannot physically touch each other, our worlds are very different worlds. I had to go see a physical therapist the other day, and it was the first time in, I think, a month that I actually had physical contact with someone, and it was a kind of a shocking thing to realize it had been that long. So the social crisis has got to do with our lack of ability to connect in a 3-dimensional way. And even though we love Zoom and we love all the different technologies, there's something about being present together, and there's something about being able to interact with each other that changes the way that we experience the world. And when you have a social crisis like this, it can often manifest as a mental health crisis. And what that represents is that being isolated and separated and in a condition that can be called lonely is kind of antithetical to who we are. As we get into questions and answers here in a bit, what we'll talk about is, who in your world is isolated. Some of you may have family who you haven't seen for a while or haven't been able to connect with for a while. So one of the challenges of this particular set of circumstances is that this separation, isolation, and loneliness can create, emotional conditions like anxiety and depression, but certainly sadness, lethargy, and all kinds of other emotional, mental health kinds of quandaries. The social crisis really directly affects us, and because what happens to human beings is we have this way of operating the world. We have a mind, a body, emotions, and spirit. It's called the whole person model. And the two that are in red there are the two that are most vulnerable at the moment for most of us, and the two where we also have the most power and influence to be able to manage. And so if you look at these bidirectional arrows, if you trigger one of these, or you have a hot spot in one of these, you will notice that it affects and has the potentiality of affecting everything else. And one of the ways that happens is when we answer the question, who are we mentally? Well, we are our needs and our wants and our routines and such. And we really have a lot of things that really create us in terms of our sense of self. And if we disrupt any of these things, and if you look at this list, you might notice that patterns and routines and habits for most of us have been strongly disrupted. Going to the store, wearing a mask, all these things are in fact major disruptions to the way that we see ourselves mentally. Whether you should wear a mask or not can confront your values and so on. So who we are mentally is being disrupted on a very, very high level. Who are we emotionally? Well, it's all these emotions that we have, and it's our ability to control these emotions. And one of the prevailing sets of ideas that psychologists and psychiatrists are talking about these days is that our ability to manage our emotions protects us against having this loss of emotional control, protects us against having emotional outbursts and irritability, and sometimes having anger for no reason, and emotional overreactions. And I would ask you to look for yourself if you've had a time in the last 3-4 months where you noticed either at the moment or later on if you had an irritable experience. My colleague is living in New York, and she is living in a 900 square foot apartment with 2 daughters who are 30 and 32. And she reported to me about a month ago that she was pretty sure that 2 of the 3 of them are going to make it out alive. And, joking aside, I asked her what was the biggest emotional component, and she said it was chronic irritability on everyone's part. So these particular emotions that we have, our ability to control them is part of our natural competency as human beings. We identify or answer the question, who am I, in part by identifying, the things that we do. And the roles that we play. So if you have any of these particular roles or other roles, or identify yourself in any of these, you'll notice that in many ways, this has been disrupted. And I was talking to a psychotherapist friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he's now doing all of his therapy online. And he was talking about the fact that one of the observations he has is that there's an unmooring of our identity for some of us, because if you're, let's say you're a yoga practitioner, which I'm sure people are on this call, some there are, part of the way you know that you're a yoga practitioner is that you get up in the morning and you put your yoga gear on and you get your bottle of water and your mat and your towel and you get your bag and you go to a yoga studio. And that being in the presence of other people allows you to self-identify as a yoga student. If you do the same thing and go sit in front of your TV, there's something diminished about the experience. It's not quite as powerful. So it has a kind of a corrosive or erosive experience on our own identity of who we are. Again, a mental health potential problem. Okay, so our brains, our minds have been created and evolved to be able to be problem-solving machines. And the most important thing to know about the way that our brains operate is that reality and perception is the same. Anything that's a real threat is the same as anything that's a perceived threat. I'm going to deal with a perceived threat to my survival, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the way I would with a real threat until I reconfirm that, in fact, the threat is real or not. The operating principle of our minds is better to be safe than sorry. And so chaos, again, is a threat to our survival because it throws us into confusion, complexity, randomness, and it makes it harder to be able to solve problems because the problems are more overlapping, more complex, more challenging than ever before. And just when we might have a good solution to one problem, wear a mask, then we find out we can't go any place indoors to wear a mask, to have and sit and have a meal. So more problems on top of that. We are now living in a world where we are overloaded. Personally, whenever I see the red Christmas ball, someone's called it, these days I try to avert my eyes. I don't think I want to see it anymore. The reason you see pictures of people like this is because our brains are confronting so much. And the research is indicating that this is the most stressful time for many, many people in their lives. And as the number says, there are 69% of people say COVID is the biggest stress of their lives. Okay, again, we're gonna do a little breathing exercise, except this time what I'm gonna ask you to do is I'm gonna ask you to take 4 breaths in, or 4 seconds in, hold for 2, and 4 out. And you go in through your nose, hold 2, and out for 4. And so it'll go like this. So if you wanna close your eyes, that's great. If you wanna sit in your back of your chair, that's great. So here we go. We're going to take in through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2. Out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4. One more time. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Very nice. And then again, just notice even a little breathing can relax your body. And can be a useful tool to you. Breathing shallow or fast is one of the conditions that is caused by stress. And so if you're able to relax and actually breathe a little longer, a little deeper, you will notice and feel the relief pretty quickly. This is a chart that I abstracted from some research about the phases that we go through mentally and emotionally as the crisis begins. So I won't read all the words for you, but I'd like you to notice where you have been and where you might be at this moment. It turns out, as a practical matter, that most people go through some version of this initially when they find out what the stress is about and when they start to get really stressed. And then they go through it again with as a member of a family unit, and then they might go through the same process again as a member of a work unit. So one of my clients is Kaiser Permanente, and I was working with some people a few months ago, and I showed them this chart, and this woman said, I went through this instantly for a couple of days when I heard about COVID, and then I realized that this was going to affect my family. And then I realized it was going to affect my working situation. And she said, I've now had to go through the loss and grieving phase multiple times. And so the loss and the grieving is typically the loss and the grieving of normal, what we used to know as normal. So this is a a process that people go through. Everybody goes through it in some way or other. If you're in it right now, or if you've been in it, don't be surprised. I'm going to show you another version of this momentarily, but first I want to just point out one thing, and that is that in terms of survival triggers, there are three big survival triggers. The first one is uncertainty, ambiguity, or the inability to predict the future, or anytime you get conflicting information or advice, anytime you're in a situation where you thought you could tell the future and you can't anymore, that is a problem, a big trigger for our anxiety. The second one is loss of control. We have built for ourselves certain levers of control, and suddenly those levers have no effect. We don't have the same ability to affect change or to influence people. Some of you may have noticed that people's productivity from home is going down, and there's a whole conversation to be had about that, especially in the beginning of a chaotic event. So losing control over, influence over your world is a trigger. And then the third one, which is a very big one, which we talked about briefly, is this whole experience of isolation. The reduction of social isolation, in some ways, it is really a potent undercurrent and foundation of all the danger we experience, because in some ways we need more connection now than probably we have in some way, in some other settings. And what's happening is now we have isolated ourselves, and we find out that being together is more of a problem than before. So what we know, just to wrap up the sort of general summary, is, we can be operating just fine and logical and rational. And, this is a big advantage. Our prefrontal cortex is a huge advantage to us on the planet. And, we're doing fine. We're planning. We're consciously making decisions. We're using logic and rationality, and we're able to think through things. And suddenly we're confronted with some kind of enormous danger. And what happens is that it automatically lights up the limbic system, and what we call is the prefrontal cortex. It gets hijacked. And I would use as a reference point your experience of 9/11, when you found out about the happenings at the World Trade Center. If you go back in time and just notice that, how quickly it shocked us, and you individually and collectively. It shocked us. We were stunned for a moment. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to say. The limbic system was firing on all cylinders, and it was really overloaded. So we got a little hijacking there. So when chaos overwhelms the prefrontal cortex, what happens is that we start to have this condition of chronic stress. And chronic stress has corrosive effects on our brain and our body and our being, as it were. And so every time you have this experience of this enormous amount of chaos, crises, confusion, inability to predict the future or control things, and this part of your brain gets lit up, it has this really negative effect upon our brains as well as our bodies. And so if you see or have seen, as we all have, some of these circumstances, now you may understand why. If you see or see in the news that, we sold more bullets and guns in the 3 months after the COVID began than we did at any time in our history, including 9/11. That's kind of understandable now, because the chaos has overwhelmed the prefrontal cortex. If you see this in your local market, you can see why people are reacting that way. It also explains in part why people end up doing this kind of hoarding, because when you get really scared and when you get really triggered, what happens is the part of your brain that's non-logical and rational will start to take over. And so now most of us now know that if you go to Costco, you can find, or whatever store it is, you can find toilet paper and whatever else you need to know or need to have, and they have limitations on it. And so what they've done is they've had to manage this part of our brains for us. I was thinking about this process for myself, and I was wondering where I personally, or how I personally respond to overwhelming chaos. And this is what happens whenever I get my prefrontal cortex gets hijacked. I'm one of those people who likes sugar. And so if I have found a long time ago that if you give me some sugar in any basic form, I can be happy because the pain goes away for a few seconds. I found this picture, actually someone else found the picture, sent to me, and it's a picture of what I would look like if I were 7 years old in the middle of a chaotic event today, and it looks like that. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that. I'd be terrified and have chocolate all on my face because that would be the place that I would go. Okay, so how do we get from the place we are to the next place? And this is the evolution of this process. And the process goes, we're going to go through this uncertainty process, and we're going to go through over to anxiety and confusion and so on. And then at some point, and we may have this happen a few times, is we'll go into acceptance, and where we're really trying to get to is resilience. And resilience is that capacity to recover for some challenging, traumatic, difficult set of events. And so some of you may be here already. I hope you are. Some of you may not be here, and that's okay. What we're trying to do is we're trying to be collectively and individually able to go through the cycle at the top, get ourselves down to a place of some kind of acceptance, and be able to get into the space of resilience. And when you get to resilience, what will happen is there's a whole new set of abilities kick in, some skills will start to evolve, and we will get through this, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So, big breath. How do you calm the chaos? So, a lot of research gone into the next few slides, 3 slides here. We want to talk about, how you can settle the chaos that's in your world at any particular moment, and how you can accelerate and access your resilience. And so we did a lot of research on the most effective people that we knew, and we found out that there was a way that they started the day that was particularly powerful and useful, which we're going to share with you now. And the first thing that was really interesting, and I'm now a devotee of this, is to plan the next day the night before to the ability that you can. And the plan simply might be an outline, or it might be looking at your agenda, or it might be a to-do list, but having some sense about what the next day looks like. Now, having said that, I'm sure, like everybody on this call, that given the way that the world is, you can have a great plan and the plan gets shot in the first hour, of your day. But having the plan the night before has the effect of calming your brain a little bit and letting you know that you're on a particular path. The second principle or idea that most effective people have found is to get up on time, especially Monday through Friday, in a scheduled, planned way, like you're going to work, because many of you are going to work. But have some kind of scheduled plan, some kind of rhythm to that, some kind of routine to that gives, again, your mind some sense of planning, some sense of structure, because that is part of what's missing and part of what we need to have to get ourselves more calm. There is a lot of evidence that having some kind of morning ritual, waking up into the quiet, or doing some breathing exercises, or doing a morning meditation can be a great calming effect on you. It can create a certain kind of calmness, a certain kind of comfort for us as we begin. So this is a particularly useful tool we find a lot of research around. Many people now know that there's a lot of research recently been completed and done that says that gratitude and appreciation, when you experience it directly, has the ability to change the way that our brains operate. It has a chemical effect on us. It has a calming effect on us. So the practice that I try myself is when I wake up in the morning and I happen to do a quiet and the breathing part. The next thing I do is I list 5 things I'm grateful for having in my life, or being in my life, or people in my life. And the trick to the gratitude process is to feel the gratitude, not just to mention the names and such. Something I found, a colleague of mine who's very, very effective guy says he limits his news intake, and so I use this particular principle pretty effectively. I don't watch the news till 5:30, and the backstory on this principle is he said that if there's any important news, it'll find you. And I found that, frankly, not having access to the news during the day has been incredibly useful to me in terms of calming my affect along the way. And then the last thing in terms of just beginning a day is to choose a mindset, and the mindset that seems to be most effective to people, or for a lot of people, is the mindset of being realistic and optimistic. Realistic and optimistic. So facts and data, let's work with what we got, but let's look for opportunities and possibilities. And so this particular one I've tested and recommended to many, many of my clients, and I get a lot of feedback that this is one of the top most useful ideas that we're passing along. So that's how to start the day. That's a few things about how to start the day. In terms of keeping centered throughout the day, there's a few things we know. Of course, breathing would be a top of that. Slow down, getting recentered and focused whenever you need to. I have some yellow stickies with breathing on it. I recommend those. Bathroom, you know, your study, wherever you're working, having some breathing signs. A second notion is to manage inputs, including by setting boundaries. One of the pieces of research I stumbled across was a Stanford researcher was doing some work, and he said that that if you can carve out a particular time each day, you know, maybe an hour in the morning or half an hour, or maybe an hour, half an hour in the afternoon, that isn't interrupted, and you can either work, or if you need a break, you can take a break. If you have some boundaries or some ability to manage your inputs, it gives you the sense of control and gives you a sense of being able to be the master of your tiny universe for a moment. So not being available 100% of the time is actually a very important thing. You don't have to be available to everybody 24 hours a day, unless you have one of those jobs where you have to be, and then we got to chat. We got to talk about that. Refining your expectations. What does that mean? Well, it turns out that a lot of people who are working remotely are struggling with the balance of life and work. And so what we notice is there is a transition period, and that transition period means that people's work in terms of quantity and quality might dip a bit. And so we want you to refine your expectations, recommend you refine your expectations about this. So if someone has a blip or a beep in their, or a decline in their performance, that you talk with them about it, see what you can do to support them, as opposed to, you know, holding the same set of expectations you might if everybody were in the office. Identify where you do have control and influence, and see if you can maximize the amount of attention or energy that you have around those things. That there might not be many things, but having some sense about, well, you know, what can I control? Well, I can control what I eat. I can control when I stand up. I control when I breathe. And being able to get a little more access to feeling a little more power can be a useful thing. Compassion and understanding for others. Turns out that one of the other quality skills that is evolving in the behavioral sciences these days, in addition to gratitude and appreciation, is compassion for people and understanding. So having some compassion for others and their circumstances and checking in on them can be a very, very useful thing for you. Also having compassion for ourselves. I don't know how many of you have gone through this process, but I found a couple of weeks ago, I kind of hit the wall, and for some reason, for 2 days, I wanted to sleep. And I was able to, you know, set my boundaries up so I got a lot more rest. I went to bed a lot earlier, but finding ways to have a little compassion with ourselves is actually a very powerful tool. And then, you know, if you can find some humor in the chaos, that's useful, because there are dramatic links between laughter and our well-being. If anybody needs a hit of humor, just Google texts with dogs, TEXTS with dogs. And for most people, that will give you an instant hit of the necessary chemicals. And then the last page is taking a look at others. One of the most important things that we think we can do for each other is to share our experience of what's happening and to validate our experience and emotions. And so you might find that people are going up and down, people are a little depressed, anxious, and so on. And rather than try and talk them out of it, rather than try and get them to change their state, is to allow them to have the experience they're having and to validate it's okay. No one's been through this before. 9/11 was a very difficult time for all of us. But within a couple of months, you know, many of us were kind of back to normal. This looks like things are changing pretty slowly. So just the ability to validate what people's experience is and can be is very useful. Find any way you can to appreciate, acknowledge, and to thank people. I have just a particular rule for myself is that anytime I'm in a public setting or I have a mask on, I try to find someone to thank for coming to work that day. I live near a market in Sacramento, and whenever I go into this market, which is usually later at night, I always find someone who's a clerk or someone and just walk up and say thank you for coming to work today so I can be here. And 9 times out of 10, just the expression of appreciation and thanks is something that can be very positive for people. If you have a problem, one of the things we know about including people is that collective problem solving, including people in how to help solve your problems can really be a useful tool because it handles the social needs that we have. It also lets people contribute to each other and support each other. So if you have a problem, rather than solving it yourself, if you include other people in it, in that collective problem solving, that can be a very positive experience as well. This is an interesting one because I first did this webinar in late February, and I said this and had no idea how far this was going to go. But we need to start thinking about the new normal. I know that everybody on this call has, and get other people involved in the conversation as well. One of the sub-elements of this is to keep track of lessons learned. And what I mean by lessons learned is to have a place where you collect for yourself, but if you have people reporting to you, have them also collect, what are they learning about how they're operating in this crisis? What are they learning about how your organization is operating in this crisis? And anything else that is relevant to that. There's a mythology, I think, that often is true, which is that as soon as this is over, we'll go back and see what we learned. But honestly, I don't know about you, but I think when this is over, I'm going to be exhausted and I want to get to the new normal as fast as possible. So if you can collect and start thinking about, what am I learning? What's the new normal going to look like? And start to collect those when we have a chance to actually process them, I think you'll have a much more robust and rich experience. For those of you who are logged in all the time, you got to get up and move around for 90 seconds every 90 minutes. You have to physically move your body. You cannot sit in a chair, no matter how good the chair is, for hours at a time. It has a depleting effect upon our mind, body, emotions, and spirit there. So just get up and move around. Any kind of movement, from stretching to running in place to jumping jacks to whatever you can do, but you got to do it every 90 minutes at least. And then lastly is to be a champion of possibility. And one of my favorite clients said that my job is to remind people that we'll get through this together and that we'll be better together, and hopefully we'll be better than we've ever been before. And so to be a champion of the possibility and the opportunity that we're going to get through this alive and we're going to get through this together. So just a couple things in wrapping up the content. If you're able to get through to your prefrontal cortex, that's where we have some of the magic. That's where some of the magic gets made. If you can create some new habits, routines, and patterns, that gives your mind something to rest upon, a foundation. Anything you can do to use to calm the chaos in yourself or others is very helpful. And then to remind ourselves that we're all in this together, and that we're gonna, if we can find some moments of joy or some moments of fun or some moments of humor, those go a long way. Sometimes the silliest thing gets to be the funniest thing, it turns out. I want to give you a couple of quotes that I found I thought were very useful or very interesting. Fear is contagious, so is bravery and courage. That is particularly true in times of crises, of course, in times of chaos. And then a particular quote, my life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. And I think the point of this quote is we have enough actual crises that we don't need to invent anymore. So sometimes our minds can be filled with things that aren't really true. So be careful that you don't add to that. Okay, one more moment of breathing here. So everybody just take a moment to breathe and we'll do some Q&A. So I'll let you do this for yourself for 30 seconds. Okay. So that's what we have for content. So we have time. This is a time for questions, answers, or if you have best practices you want to share, or you have things that you're seeing that are working, we're thrilled to hear what you have to say. Let's see here. Let's see. Actually, Betsy, let me answer your question. Betsy, I have a summary set of slides that I'll pass along to get to you. It's not all the slides because you're going to need all the slides, so I'll definitely pass those along. United Airlines, what? Oh my God! Tell Lori I said hello. I hope our airline flies again. That's great. Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate that. If you have something you've been doing that's working, I'd really be interested in that. If you got a way of handling things at home, or you got a way of handling your kids, really interested in that. I had a client a couple of weeks ago. I was on a call. It's the first time she's ever worked from her home. First time she's ever done Zoom as her way of operating. She was at her kitchen table. We were talking. She had her head down, and her 6-year-old son flew behind her head twice with an airplane. I wish I could have captured it. It was hysterical. And then when she found out what happened, she was freaked out. It's going to be part of the process. So it's actually a best practice to figure out ways to interact with your kids along the way and your family. So anybody got a best practice you want to share? It'd be fabulous. Support and reassure the team. Good. Good. Great question, Jesse. My bias goes like something like this. I think that anything you can talk about in realistic and respectful terms is better than things you can't talk about. So what I would recommend, Jesse, is if your team is, and you can do this either as a one-on-one, or you can do this if you got a team you want to talk to. You say, listen, why don't we have a conversation about what's going on? And, I'd like to have it be as open and honest and respectful as possible. First of all, how are you each doing? And I think there's a conversation people can, people say how they're doing. Well, today's kind of rough, or this week has been okay, or I'm doing great. And talk about why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. That whole conversation can be very useful. The second thing is to tell people, Jesse, that we don't know how this is going to work, but we know it's going to work. We're going to figure this out. And I think part of what will give them some reassurance, Jesse, is the level of your commitment as a manager to being being able to and passionate about, we're going to find a way through. If you're a manager of people, people are now watching you and they're listening to you about every word that you say to try and find out what's happening. Something special. So part of this is to I think that's that realistic but optimistic perspective. Now, I happen to have been raised by people who are incredibly optimistic, and so I have to tell you that I'm certain that we're going to get through this. Personally, I'm certain of it, and I think we're going to be better as a society and hopefully as a humanity. And I'm passionately committed to do whatever I can. So my own bias about it, Jesse, is to talk about what's happening honestly and openly, but also to remind people that we're going to find a way through. And so let me stop there. Connie Juarez Dural, hi. Everyone's feeling like we're in survival mode. Is there any way of getting to feelings like you are succeeding during a pandemic? Getting the feelings like that, good to feel like we are thriving again. Yeah, So, Connie, the best I got to say about this goes like this. You might have to find a moment during the day that's great instead of a whole day that's great. So, Connie, can you talk to me? Can you turn your speaker on? Okay, I don't know how to do that. So, can you actually talk?
Yes. Hi.
Oh, there. Hi, Connie. Wow. You can turn your camera on if you want to as well.
I'm actually in a very bright place, so it's
Okay,
probably more shadow
it's
than
it's
anything.
fine, no worries. So do you have moments during days that are great?
Yes, we do. I mean,
Yeah,
between putting out fires and just trying to, keep things going,
yeah,
yes, there are moments of satisfaction, but they seem to be not as often
yeah.
as they used to be.
Okay, good. And where do you work and what job do you have?
I am in San Mateo County, and I work for the county manager's office.
Okay, so here's what I would say. Um, every human being needs three things. This is my belief system. Everybody needs unconditional love, and that is the job of your parents and your family of origin until you're able to generate that for yourself. Then you need some times of some acceptance from your parents and your peers until you find a capacity to be able to accept yourself. But then what we all need along the way, and really makes a difference for us when we get to kind of be, quote marks, adults, is a few moments when we feel special. And so what I find that really works, Connie, is for you to catch people doing something well, even a small thing, and acknowledge them for that, or to thank people for something that's a small gesture, or something where they were I ask people, when's the last time you had a meal? And people go, yeah, dinner last night. I was like, thank you very much for working all day today. Would you please get some food? Would you please take a break? So I think there's a place there where small things become bigger things, Connie, and that we acknowledge people for showing up, and we acknowledge people for going above and beyond. One of my clients' best practices, which he shared with me, is he said, every week I ask people on Fridays to tell me three things that they did this week that were above and beyond what was expected of them. And then each Monday when they have a meeting, he acknowledges everybody on his team for one of those. So let me tell you that best practice again. So he's got a team of 8. And what he does is he invites each of the 8 people to send a note on Friday of 3 things they did that were above and beyond in their point of view, in their perspective. And so on Monday, he acknowledges each of them publicly for one of them. And so, Connie, what that's about is kind of getting people to start thinking about, the out of the survival mode and into the feeling better mode in real time. So that small stuff turns out to be big stuff. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate that very much. You're welcome, Jesse. That's great. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else got a best practice that you use, something you found that really works? I had a gratitude helps. Janelle Morales. Is that a question or is that an answer, Janelle?
That is an answer.
Okay, talk to me. Wait a minute. What kind of picture is that? Is that Tahoe?
That is Lake Tahoe. That is the lobster back there on the hill.
Fantastic.
I have been practicing morning gratitudes for many years now.
Yes.
And it is a wonderful feeling to start the day off that way.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough that I have a little private balcony off of my home. And before I leave for work in the morning, as I'm getting ready, I stand out on my balcony and I use my chime.
Nice.
And
nice.
I speak gratitudes out to the world for whatever I'm feeling gratitude for that day. And it truly sets the day off very, very well.
That's fantastic. Is that the picture of where you are in the morning?
No, I wish that it would be. I do live in Lake Tahoe, and I know exactly where that spot is. I don't travel there every day, though.
Okay. Okay, good. So, but you've been doing this for a long time. What's the experience of feeling gratitude that's different than thinking gratitude for you, Janelle? If that makes sense.
The physical.
I can say I'm grateful that you just shared that. I am, but that's different than if I feel gratitude.
Yes, the physical act is actually speaking it aloud for one thing. You can't just think it. Speaking it actually puts it into concrete, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it takes an effort to think about, what am I truly grateful for today?
Yeah.
And I think about things that might have occurred over the past 2 or 3 days and go, oh yes, that person that made that difference, I am so glad that she spoke that way.
Yes,
Or,
very nice.
or I'm so glad that I found those wonderful steaks for dinner last night. Those were really, really good. And I was
That's fantastic. Good for you. Good. All right, good. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm grateful that you did, by the way. One of the practices that I think is really, really powerful is to share with the people who work for you something that sounds like this. So let me talk to let's see here. So Connie, are you still on? Can you still see it? So let's suppose Connie.
I'm here.
Okay, so let's suppose, Connie, that you are one of my folks, and you and I are having a conversation. It was a Friday afternoon. I might say something like this. Connie, I don't know what you did this week that was above and beyond. I don't know, if you sacrificed any time with your family or your sleep or whatever, but I just want you to thank you for all the things I'll never know that you accomplished this week, and for going above and beyond if you did. And I want to thank you for pressing through the chaos and the crisis and the craziness this week to get your job done. I know it was a rough week for a lot of us. I really appreciate all that you did that I'll never know. Sometimes saying thank you for the stuff that's unknowable that they know is as powerful as acknowledging them for the specific stuff that you know they did. So just another tip there. Let's see, Melody Sereno. Hello, Melody. Second, the idea of acknowledgement. Just got a note from my college president where I am a trustee, and all talked about 5. So it's 5 other things we have had. That's fantastic. Yep. The brain likes to find those things that are working. It's great. That's very good. It's very good. Anybody else got a best practice or something that you tried that did not work? Anybody try something, like you gave everybody Friday off, and then nobody said thank you and the work didn't get done, or, like that. What else? Questions, comments, reactions? The limbic system is automatic. And one of my colleagues said that he has a practice now that from noon on Friday till noon on Monday, he manages all of his input so he doesn't have any news that triggers him. So he actually makes sure that the limbic system is neutralized, and to the degree he can, of course. So that's one of those things. People are hesitant to be honest about their stress. Oh, outstanding. Yeah. Well, Melody, if you can tune your speaker on there, talk to me for a moment. Where are you, Melody?
I'm in Santa Cruz.
Hey, and thanks for showing up again. I remember you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
By the way, there's a weird thing going on with video. Some of you might have experienced this, and that is that people are a little nervous about turning their video on because they haven't prepared, or they don't, how they look and stuff. And there's a thing called Zoom fatigue, and Zoom fatigue has 2 elements to it. One is that we're literally focused on a person's face, or a different person's face hour after hour, and so I'm like, I can't look away. I'm kind of gravitated. And the second thing is, if you have your face up on the screen and you can see yourself, you notice that you don't have any hair, and it's in contact with their self-image. So I want we're going to probably all have to get over that, So find people hesitant to be honest about their stress. Tell me a bit more about that.
So at the start of all of our staff meetings with our analyst staff, and I'm in the CAO office, I try to do a little check-in and ask, okay, how's everybody doing today, right? Yeah. And just, a couple sentences, how you doing today? And I know that there's a couple of people who are like super stressed because they have kids, and the whole school thing is on again, off again, on again, off again, and right. The whole managing all of that, and yet they say, I'm doing okay, right?
Yes.
But I know they're not doing okay. But I think they're hesitant to be honest about their stress.
Okay, good. So one thing you can do, you can have a conversation and say, okay, we're going to have a conversation about how we all are today. And here's what you can't say. You can't say fine, and you can't say okay. Okay? And you can't say great. What I really want to know is I want to know what's been the most stressful thing you've had to encounter in the last 48 hours. So if you make the question more specific and you actually guide it in a direction like what's the biggest stressor you've had, you might find somebody says something that kind of opens it up. And you can also say, listen, we're all going through this together. There's no right or wrong way of not only thinking, but there's no right or wrong way of even being these days. So, so try that out. A little more specific question, put some boundaries on it.
Okay, thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Janelle, look at you. Thanks for turning your camera on, Janelle. That's so fantastic. All right, that's beautiful. And listen, everybody who's willing, turn your camera on. Let's make this a group event, right? Anybody who's willing to turn your camera. Now, some of you are a little scared, I know, because you didn't do your makeup or you didn't comb your hair. That's okay. That's great. Okay, there's Connie. Thank you, Connie. Connie, are you in the woods? We're going to come visit you. Everybody on the call, I'm going to give you Connie's address at the end of this call. We're going to visit her next Friday night. It's fantastic. Who else? That's great. How do you say it? Paella? Paella?
Paya.
Paella.
Oops.
That's the best. That is the best. Paya is not in the office today, folks.
This is what happens when you're hooked up to your office machine via a virtual connection.
Nice.
It still thinks you're in your office when you're not.
That is outstanding. Outstanding. Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. That makes my day. We open mic for our staff meetings to recognize each other. Nice. People really enjoy. Good. So here's another thing you can do. You can tell people on Monday. On Friday, we're going to have a call. And I want everybody to be able to acknowledge one other person on the staff for something they contributed to our support this week or our success this week or our effectiveness. So give them the assignment of looking for things that each other are doing well. And tell them everybody needs to bring somebody you want to acknowledge to the process. That's fantastic. Bob Page, thank you very much. Bob Page, you got a tie on and a white shirt, dude. That is awesome. That's fantastic. Turn on your speaker, Bob.
I turned on my phone, turned off the phone mute, but forgot to do the Zoom
okay.
on mute.
So you're actually
I've always been in the office.
Wow.
I've never left the office.
Wow. Your family must miss you, huh?
Yeah. That's been rough. I'm the Register of Voters for San Bernardino County, so I have had work to do all through this pandemic.
Wow. Thank you for the work you're doing. And all the people on the call are doing that kind of work. That's really, really important stuff. You have any questions or comments or anything that's working for you?
This is just really kind of getting me to think that I need to start focusing on some of this stuff more with my staff. My staff's pretty resilient just in general because elections are pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But this one just is extra so because of all the changes that keep getting thrown at us from the state. And some of that direction isn't finalized yet. We're still waiting for the legislature to come back into session to approve a bill that's in committee that's going to give us some authority to do some different things or requirements to do them a certain way.
Okay.
And struggling with all the polling places that we had reserved for November that are now telling us no way.
Wow.
And trying to figure out how we can have enough locations and avoid having too long of a line at our polling places.
Yeah.
So I'm doing things like this for myself, but I need to start paying attention to whether my staff is doing things like this.
I appreciate you saying so. How big's your staff, Bob?
It is, I have about 33 full-time staff. We add another 30 seasonal staff, and then as I get closer to the election, we add 300 to 400 temporary employees. Okay,
gotcha. So since you're about to pay more attention to them, you might ask them a couple of simple questions. First of all, I'd like to ask. I'm now you. I'd like to ask each of you to bring to our next staff meeting the answer to two questions. What has been the biggest challenge or the biggest disruption to your life since COVID came? That's a pretty big question, but think about it in terms of just trying to get people into the conversation about where are they at? That will give you some data about, are people in good shape or okay shape, they're in bad shape. Some people will say they've been up and down. Some people talk about their families. When people start talking about their kids at home, it's kind of axiomatic that if the first thing out of my mouth is, I got a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old, if that's the first thing that comes out of my mouth, that usually means there's big problems at home in terms of just managing the energy. So just ask them that question. Second of all, what have you learned about yourself, about your family, about working? What have you learned so far that you can use in your life? Those two kinds of questions can kind of open things up for a broader conversation. Yeah, that's great, Bob.
Okay.
You know, the idea that people need to feel unconditional love, that's not your job. They need to feel unconditional acceptance, that's not your job. But if you give them a few moments of feeling special, what happens is that changes the loyalty dynamic. That changes the energy dynamic. Because if you're just like, tell me what's going on with you really, and they're like, oh, he's interested. Just your interest in them will change a little of the energy. The other thing I want to say to you, Bob, and I'm communicating to everybody, if you can share something intimate or something personal or something that's authentically true for you, like if you say, I'm just making this up, you say, listen, I've gone an ups and I've gone downs. And I'm sure we've all done that. I've had moments when I'm like, well, this thing will pass. And I've had moments when I don't think I'm in total meltdown over here. I just want you to know it's okay to have whatever emotions we have. This is a place we have not been before, but we will get through it together. So to the degree that you can share a little bit about your experience, that will open it up for other people as well, Bob.
Yeah, I've already had to share one moment when I lost my composure on a call with the Secretary of State and a number of other counties and voter advocates, and still having to deal with it because word got out into other community groups that I felt a certain way, and I'm still having to address that. So
yeah. You don't want to over-rotate on the sharing. I understand. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for standing your ground, though. I appreciate the job you're doing, Bob. It's really important. Thanks, man. Hey, Jesse, did you have your hand up? You want to share something? Where's Jesse?
Oh, hi. I'm at my work, I'm in my office, so my camera is a little dinky here. I just wanted to put a plug in for full EV.
It's okay.
It's you can do, and I don't earn any money plugging full EV. It's just something that I've used for a long time for my meetings. So some of you have gone to conferences where you can do a word cloud where people can text a word to a number and it broadcasts on the screen. They can even do faces like, happy face, mad face, sad face. People can participate online or by text. And I find that's just a good way to do. I think people have a lot of fear of emotional exposure. If you already ask them, like, how are you feeling today? And then people are like, oh, you really want to know how I feel today? Or so if you have like something that's anonymous like that, and people kind of get it out of the way.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that very much. And the idea of a word cloud, especially in that kind of a space where people don't have to reveal themselves, is great. Fabulous. Thank you very much. Let's see, Jody London. Where are you, Jody? And
I'm right here.
Hi.
Hi. I'm the sustainability coordinator for Contra Costa County, and I wanted to share a strategy and then also just make an observation. So I have a very small team, but we try to meet daily, and just for 15 or 20 minutes sometimes. Yeah. But I have found that is so helpful because people do feel isolated, and just having that connection has been really great. And several times my team has said, you know what, this is really good. I'm so glad we did this. We actually a couple of times met for an outdoor hike, like a hiking meeting. And that was also really great, just to see each other. Yeah. And we wore masks, and, we were outdoors, and that felt safe for us. But I just want to observe that many of us working in local governments, we are dealing with the public all the time, and who knows what people are bringing. I'm thinking about what Bob was just saying, right? And particularly elected officials, people show up at your board meeting and they're angry. And I know in my other world, I'm on a school board, and sometimes people call into the meeting, and I think to myself, this person hasn't talked to a real person in probably 10 days.
Yes.
So no wonder they're dominating public comment, because and so that's where the compassion piece has come in for me. But I think that part is really hard for us, because we don't know what members of the public are carrying when they show up and want to interact with us.
Yeah, I appreciate both sides of that. What you're suggesting is that first of all, the dynamics of being together have got to change now. We don't know what it means anyway. So I have the good fortune of playing golf. I play golf. My golf course has been open. It never closed, but they instantly went to social distancing, one person to a cart. So I've been able to play 1 day a week. I have 1 day a week when everything seems normal. I don't have to wear a mask while I'm playing golf, and I'm such a bad golfer, I'm usually far away from the other people anyway, so that works out fine. But just being in the normal setting is great. But when I go to the market and there's I have to stay away from people now. I'm actually scared for my own health. I'm in that high risk group, so we know about that. The second thing you said was really interesting, is that we have more isolation and more probable loneliness than we probably ever had before for a lot of people. So I appreciate that you have some compassion for people, because sometimes they're looking for some interaction, right? And so, we got to keep that in mind as well. Yeah.
Well, and they also show up really angry, right? They're like,
yeah, high irritability, of course, because the world's so crazy. Absolutely. One of my clients has a part of their Monday calls when there are 8 or 9 of them, and 2 people have to bring a joke every week to the call, and they end the call with the 2 jokes. And so what he said was, that there's now competition and they have to be clean and they can't be political. There's some rules around it, but this is like week number 6, and he said the jokes are getting funnier and the competition is ramping up. And he said it's the highlight of our time together. So that's another thing you can do. Another best practice someone told me about was one of my clients is an assessor, and once a month they have lunch together on Zoom. So everybody brings their meal, they turn on all the cameras, they eat together and talk together like they were if they were working together. So just a possibility there. All right, anything else? We got a couple more minutes here if anybody else wants to share anything. Best practices, things you tried. I appreciate seeing your shiny faces. All right. Okay, well, if there's no more, then I'm going to say thank you. And I want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to interact with all of you. I found out through CSAC, really, I found out how much my life is dependent upon the county. I live in Sacramento County. And so I did not really know how much of my life is impacted by county government. And I have to tell you, it's a miracle. I have one of the great county experiences of all time. And a quick share, I moved into my house 25 years ago, and the woman I bought the house from, the real estate lady, assured me I was on the sewer system, and it turned out 27 years later I was on septic. And so last week I had to go from septic to sewer, and the county was just fantastic. I mean, I couldn't have done it without them. And a lot of nice people, wonderful people. So I just want to say, all the work we're doing in the county, you guys are doing in the counties, really makes a difference for everyone's life who you affect in the positive way. So thank you for that. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to talk to me privately or personally, you can just reach out to Chastity. She can get you my contact information. I'll send along a summary set of slides with the key concepts with it you can use. If I can be of any support or service to any of you, I'll be happy to do so. Everybody take care of yourself. Thanks for participating today. Thanks. Bye.